Good evening. I am very excited, and if you know me, then you know what my excitement level can be. I'm very excited to welcome you here tonight on the UPIKE campus for our second annual, and I hope there will be many more, our second annual Women's Roundtable discussion. We celebrate the annual National Women's History Month, and we have taken here on this campus the liberty to shorten the quite lengthy official theme, and it really is lengthy if you go to the website, to Women's Inspiration, Meaningful Innovation. And that will allow us to discuss women's accomplishments in just about all the disciplines and the fields of interest that we offer here on campus and that are represented here on our stage. Now, to be completely honest, however, Women's History Month is a thorn in my side. While it calls for celebration, it reminds me every year of the many ways in which we women, even in the 21st century, you and I, are still not equal to our male counterparts. We may vote, work inside the home and away from it. We may have access to the pill and to education, but when we enter the job market, our skills and talents weigh less on the employer's wage scales. And wages, money, the dollar, the mighty dollar, is, after all, what is, for most people, most important these days. So according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the number of working women has risen from 5.1 million in 1900, of course that was ages ago, to 66.2 million in 2009. Between 1997, a lot closer to us today, and 2008, almost 60% of all women worked. And I'm willing to bet that most of our students here have some kind of a career in mind for their future. So we have this notion that a job is almost automatically a part of our life. So this no doubt means inspired innovation for women. But it does not mean that we have access to the same careers as men. Would anyone here in the audience like to guess what currently the top 5 occupations for women are? Right now, what are the top 5 occupations? Nursing is number 2. Elementary and middle school teachers, number 3. That's probably up there, but it's non-paid. I'm talking about the paid. Yes. Secretaries and administrative assistants, of those who are officially declared as such, 96.8% are female. 92% of all registered nurses are female, and I did not contact Dr. Simpson before this roundtable. I should have asked how many nursing students in the current class are male. Do we happen to have a nursing student here who could enlighten us? Oh, Mary, you're there.
We have, out of 36 students, we have 8 males.
Well, that is, that is fantastic. That beats every national average. Andrea, would you call us progressive?
Yes.
Cashiers, 74.4% of all cashiers are female, and that wouldn't surprise anyone either. Although probably I would imagine 10 years from now there are no cashiers left. So yes, we are working, but we're primarily working in fields that pay less than the fields in which men rise to the top. This vicious cycle creates a significant wage gap affecting the entire household and therefore, of course, all of society. And I'm particularly pleased that men ventured forth and came to this women's roundtable because, yes, issues concern women, but when issues concern women, they trickle down and they affect men just as well. The 2011 American Community Survey conducted by the U.S. Census Bureau found that, and I quote here the passage that pertains to Kentucky because that's what obviously interests you and me. In Kentucky, the median pay for a woman full-time year-round is $32,684 per year, $32,000. While the median yearly pay for a man is $41,612. This means that women are paid 79 cents for every dollar paid to men, amounting to a yearly gap of $8,928 between full-time working men and women in this state. Nationally, women working full-time year-round are paid just 77 cents for every dollar paid to all men, and women of color experience even greater disparities. African American women are paid an incredible 64 cents, and Latinas just 55 cents for every dollar paid to white, non-Hispanic men. 55 cents. Representative Combs, my friend Leslie, who sadly sends her regrets. I know she was on the program, but you know how Frankfurt acts, and she could not make it here at the last minute. She called this morning. She would be interested to know that by congressional districts, the numbers do not look very good for the 5th, in which Pikeville is located. Right here, women are paid an average 72% of the salary a man earns, whereas her sisters in districts 3 or 4 are paid 82%. In other words, financially, Eastern Kentucky is not particularly appealing to women. I have a hunch that it was not the lure of money that drew Josephine to the Appalachian Mountains in the 1960s, and I believe that it is not money that has kept Judge Combs fulfilled on her farm near Stanton. Sarah, as she has allowed me to call her, is one of 6 women who serve as Kentucky Court of Appeals justices. The remaining 8 are men. This is a relatively fair balance, yet only 28% of Supreme Court justices, 25% of circuit court judges, and 38% of district judges are women. In the 2012 state legislatures, by the way, Kentucky ranks 38th in the percentage of women state legislators, with 18% female membership, which is up from its 47th ranking in 2008. We are making progress, slow as it may be. I don't really wish to bore you with facts and figures, but they are important in illustrating women's lives in the 21st century in one of the leading countries of the Western world. You and I can only imagine what life may be like for an Afghani woman. So let's take a quick look at a few positive facts. Women in Kentucky have an average life expectancy of 78 years, compared to 78.8 years nationwide. Good news. Rural medical care provided, for example, by KICOM graduates has hopefully contributed to such positive news. Though Kentucky ranks 45th in the United States on the National Women's Law Center report card for women's health and well-being, thankfully, First Lady Judy Patton has set out to combat one major threat to women's health: domestic violence. As you all know, Kentucky offers a unique regionalized network of domestic violence shelters, which offers support and assistance. And I'm sure she will tell you more about her place, Judy's place, in a few minutes. And finally, let me return to my place of departure, UPIKE, and education. The Kentucky Commission on Women states in its 2012 education fact sheet that Kentucky ranks, and this is a hard pill to swallow for you and me, Kentucky ranks 48th in the United States for the percent of women with 4 or more years of college. 48th. Obviously, those of us here at this roundtable are preaching to the choir when we urge young women to learn as much as they can and to keep doing so for life. You are enrolled at a 4-year university. You're getting what it is all about. Bravo. And I really do mean that. It takes a major step to decide to spend 4 years in college and to dedicate that energy, that money, that amount of time to studying. The women in this room, the women students in this room, make up 50% of the UPIKE student body this year. They would have been in good company at last year's commencement since 61% of all graduates were women. Of the undergraduate faculty, 53% are women, compared to only 28% of the medical school faculty. Half the staff are women, but only 27% of the executive staff. Interesting. Before I turn the conversation over to my panelist friends, let me mention a few Kentucky women who simply could not be here today, though they surely would have been delighted to chime in. Mary Todd Lincoln, the genteel backbone to her rather rough around the edges husband. She of Lexington, Washington, and recent Hollywood fame. And if you have not toured the Mary Todd Lincoln House in Lexington, you have missed a great time travel experience. You really ought to go. It's an incredible experience. Madeline Breckinridge, the national women's suffrage leader, also a Kentuckian. Harriet Simpson Arnault, novelist of dollmaker fame. Skip the movie with Jane Fonda. Rosemary Clooney, iconic singer and aunt to George. And others still among the living, Bobby Ann Mason, Loretta Lynn, Naomi Judd, Diane Sawyer, relative of Howard's. I had to get that in. Crystal Gale, Patty Loveless. And if she has her way, we might even see a Senator Ashley Judd on Capitol Hill someday soon. Who knows? Innovation, inspiration, the women are out there, certainly here in Kentucky. And that takes me to our discussion. How do women do it? How do they balance family, household, career, education, social, and personal life? Would be nice to have a personal life. What inspires them in the first place? And here with me today are 4 tremendously successful women. Andrea will give me this look like, really? Well, yes, she is successful. Age 21, and you should see her resume. Who will graciously be sharing, you will be amazed, surprised, incredibly proud of my panelists here. They will be sharing their personal insights and experiences, and I couldn't be more grateful because opening up to an audience like you, including a camera, a television camera, is not easy. But nothing inspires like a life story. So I am deeply grateful. And I'm going to be quiet right now and just turn this over. And I'm hoping that one by one, each of my panelists will be willing to share with you and me what motivated her. Who or what inspired you? As you know, I will briefly introduce. You have your program in front of you. There's a lengthy bio for each of our guests in that program, and I don't want to spend much more time on introducing, but briefly, from your right, my left, we have Josephine Richardson, who co-founded Apple Shop in Whitesburg. Some of you may be from that direction. She started out as a social worker, and then that spun into all kinds of other work and enterprises. She is also an entrepreneur and co-owner of various businesses, most importantly for me, the Courthouse Cafe, where I love to eat. She's a community mover and shaker, a Rotarian, and also a mother and a grandmother. So she has certainly something to say about balancing it all. Everybody knows the First Lady on this campus and the former First Lady of the state of Kentucky, Judy Patton, who also knows quite a bit about balancing it all. She still has a full schedule. As a matter of fact, earlier, a few minutes earlier in the lobby, she shared that she had 3 appointments today and she has another 3 tomorrow. There's no retirement apparently for her. Andrea, starting out on the far corner there, Andrea is a business student, but she's much more than a business student. She is also an ROTC. What's the word? Help me here.
A cadet.
A cadet, an ROTC cadet. Little do I know. And she was last year, this totally blew my mind at the time, she was a cadet in a mountain laurel fur-blount dress. Our first one. So Andrea does it all. She's the perfect go-getter on campus, and she will provide the perspective from the next generation. And then, of course, we have Sarah Combs, the appellate court judge, who is from this region and who has a lot to contribute from the professional career woman's perspective, who will tell you what it means to come back from a lot of you shared so much last year that impressed me, from a lot of sadness, and how you recovered from it, how you turned that into positives and into energy. And I thought about your experience much, and it gave me a lot to think about. So I'm very pleased that you're willing to tell us again. Okay, so enough of me. Who would like to start?
Okay. This is on.
Who inspired you? What inspired you? What got you going, Judy?
Well, first, I want to say how delighted I am to see so many young women and young men here tonight. This is fabulous. And also, Andrea, to see a young lady on this panel. You know, you're all the next leaders. You're going to far people beyond us. And thank you, because you know, you're going to inspire a lot of young women be like you and to take over and say, this is what women need. And the younger we start, the better it is. So, who inspired me was my mother. I was raised by a strong mother. She's a widow, raising 4 daughters on her own. But the most important thing about my mother, she had education. She came to Pikeville College. And that's the important thing for all of you here tonight. It's education. And you're getting it here. And it's going to make a difference in your life. My mother was also a social worker, raising 4 daughters. And back then, they didn't make much money. But she was an advocate for women and children long before the word advocate was even mentioned. She was a strong believer that women and children should not be living in a situation where they were harmed and they feared. And though raising 4 girls on her own, many times when she's out in the field, that's what they called it when social workers was working, had to go out in the field to check on the clients. She'd bring women and children home, get them out of places where there was violence in the home. So she taught me compassion and care for other people. And I thought if I ever got into a situation, if I could be like my mother, I would take full advantage of it. And that happened really when Paul became Lieutenant Governor. And I was asked to serve on a panel for abused children. And I served on that for about 3 years. And a lot came out of that. And then Paul became governor. I created the first ever Office of Child Abuse and Domestic Violence in the governor's office. And that's where my work started. And that was, I wanted to follow my mother's legacy. We passed 25 bills in the 8 years I was down there. Judy's Place was one of them. And I never thought I'd ever have enough guts to go in front of all these legislators. And some was pretty tough, believe me. But I went to, I hated to give speeches. Oh, I got sick. I actually got sick to my stomach sometimes. Just being new at it, you know. But I learned because I cared so much about abused women and about abused children that if it took me standing up there in front of all these legislators and all these committee meetings in front of everybody and my knees would shake and I'd hold on to the table really. But that's what it takes. You find your passion. And each one of you in this place will find your passion. And you will find someone who inspires you like my mother did for me. But during the 8 years, I was out sitting outside a senator's room before he came to work, waiting for him to discuss the bill. Now that sort of puts him on the spot when you're out the first lady sitting outside waiting for him to come to work. And he said, oh dear, here's first lady, talk to me. But you do what you have to do. And you'll find that out in your life. There can be a lot of things that you don't think you can do, but you got the passion for it, you can do it. So during that time, he said, like I said, Judy's Place for Kids. At one time, when a child was sexually abused or just physically abused, first they had to go to a social worker, then to the police, then to an attorney, and all these are different offices. Different people, sometimes 7, 8 offices they go to. Big offices, big furniture, little people. Every one of these centers is in a home, little furniture, home setting, dolls, toys, and therapists and people who cares about them, and they're well trained in how to handle abused children. 15 of them across the state. And domestic violence centers. We did 15 domestic violence centers for women who abuse and bring their children for a safe area and a safe life. And in these places, they know there's a better life out there, especially to support little children. So I had someone to inspire me. And along the way, you all have somebody to inspire you. And I think everybody on this panel has somebody that, and social workers are good. You came from background of social work. So I'm just so glad I was asked on this panel. And I'm more glad I had the opportunity to be able to do what I did while I was in Frankfurt. And I wanted to thank everybody who was with me, all the advocates across the state. And nobody can do everything by themselves. They have to have help along the way, and you'll find that out. You have to have help. You have to have someone who believes in you and believes in your cause. And you'll find that out along the way. So thank you for letting me be here tonight and explaining what little bit that I could accomplish, that I could give back to the community and to women and children in the state. And it's a great commonwealth.
That's right. Thank you, Judy. I think what we will do is we will let each panelist speak, and then what I'd like to do is open up the floor for questions from you, and we'll develop a conversation. It's not that I don't have questions, but I'd rather have you ask them. Josephine?
I hope you can hear me. I don't always talk really loud. I grew up in New Haven, Connecticut. My parents were Italian immigrants. My father did develop his own business, and my mother had to drop out of school when she was 14 years old and go to work. I was one of 4 children. I have 3 brothers. To say that we were in a very patriarchal community, very male-dominated, was probably an understatement. Our family structure was where I had a huge extended family. In fact, I was recently at a reunion of 83 cousins in New Haven. I went through Catholic schools in our community and then went to a Catholic girls' high school. I think I found strength and leadership at school because we were all girls and we got to play the leadership roles. We got to run for city council, we played basketball, and there was never a doubt that we were going to go to college. It was just assumed. My family was supportive in it, but I was the only person out of these 83 cousins who went to college. I went to an all-women's Catholic college outside of New York City, and again, I was in a place with very, very strong women who encouraged us to become involved. This was the early 60s. There was a lot of social issues brought up in school, both by the church, certainly by the Catholic Church. It was Vatican II. It was a whole opening up toward the world rather than being inclusive into our own worlds. And I became involved in social service issues there. I visited, we had various organizations that would put us in touch with areas of service. And one of my projects was a home for unwed mothers. And it was in Pikeville, and it was an order of nuns that were called the Sisters of the Good Shepherd. And it was a time when if girls became pregnant when they were young, they didn't keep children. The idea was definitely to go to a home. It was very secretive. You were removed from family. And it was harsh. It was very, very harsh. When I graduated from college, I took a job in New Haven as a social worker, and my pay was $2,700 a year. Now, I had a bachelor's degree, and but you know, there was a job that I wanted to do, and I worked in city welfare, which was pretty much the bottom rung of social services at that time. I then decided to go to graduate school, and I moved into New York City with some friends of mine and went to Columbia. While I was there, my soon-to-be husband, or my boyfriend, was back in New Haven. He was finishing up a master's in architecture at Yale. So when he finished his master's degree, and I was almost finished with my master's in social work, and at that time I worked for, I had a practicum with Catholic Charities, and it was in the New York Foundling Hospital, and my job was to try to transition children that had been in long-term foster care into permanent situations, permanent home situations. So we were getting married, and my husband had done some volunteer work in Appalachia with Father Biding. I'm sure people know who he was at one time. If you don't, he was a Catholic priest who would take volunteers and just drive them around East Kentucky and help find places for them to do volunteer work. And my husband and 6 of his friends who were architecture students did low-cost housing and developed a studio for Yale here in the Appalachian Mountains. So we were getting married in July, and which we did, and this was 1969, and as I say, it was the 60s when all things were possible for us. And we were on our honeymoon in Maine, and he said to me, you know, he said, I had a call from Washington last week, which he didn't tell me about before the wedding, or probably I didn't hear him if he did. And he said, what do you think about going to Kentucky for a while? And I had an apartment on West 72nd Street in New York, which I loved, and I still had a piece of graduate school to finish. And I said, I could do anything for 6 months or a year. So we packed up. I took leaves of absence from my job and from graduate school, and we came to Whitesburg, Kentucky, at the invitation of some friends he had met who were Tom and Pat Gish, who ran the Mountain Eagle. And we came, we had this grant from the Office of Economic Opportunity in Washington, and they were going to set up workshops in minority communities around the United States, teaching film and recording techniques to people to tell their own story, because every community had been written about or put on television from someone else's point of view. And this was an opportunity to train young people and to create an organization that people would document in their own cultures. So we rented a storefront in Whitesburg and went to a high school English class. And 6 of those senior students came down after school and were very interested in this whole idea. And from that, Apple Shop was born. These young kids wrote the scripts, they interviewed people, and were just passionate about expressing their love, their interest for the community in which they were born, and putting it out there for the world to see. So my organizational skills in social work were, I helped form this group. And one of the things we did a lot together was we would sit and talk, we watched movies, I cooked, we had food always, which was very important to all of us still. And the organization just went on. The kids made movies and brought them to a couple of conferences, and they were cheered for it. They were absolutely cheered. And I feel like we gave them an opportunity and maybe an inspiration that they could do these things and they could have as much of a presence as the CBS camera people who were always coming down into Appalachia and always filming the very negative aspects of what became our community. Well, I also had a job as a social worker with a home health agency. They were just setting those up with the Appalachian Regional Hospitals. And through that, I met a lot of people out in the community, in the counties. I worked in a 3-county area of Perry, Harlan, and Letcher County. And there were many people making fabulous things that I had never seen before. I had never seen a quilt until we came here. And people making handmade baskets and carving wood and doing beautiful sculptures out of it. And coming from the urban area that I was from, I really missed bookstores. I had been always accustomed to having a bookstore that one could go read and hang out and purchase some things from. So I had the idea, with a little bit of help from a fellow we had met named Gurney Norman, who is a writer and has been a teacher. And he said, well, I think you need to open the bookstore. So I said, oh, that's a great idea. And once again, you know, all things seem possible. And so I opened a bookstore and a craft shop and gathered things from the people I had met in my job. So that was the start of the Cozy Corner in 1973. By that time, we had already had our first child, and who came to work with me all the time. But in your own business, you can kind of do that. I couldn't take her out in the field as a social worker, but she was with me. And then we had another child, and then a third child, and it all had took place around the same corner in Whitesburg, the start of Apple Shop in one part of the building, the Cozy Corner. And in 1985, I started a restaurant with a friend of mine, Laura Schuster. And I guess I'm still like meeting young people, hiring them in the restaurant, encouraging them. I've had incredible opportunities to work on a state level with arts and with women's issues. I've been a member of the Commission on Women in the past. I've had a lot of people that I've worked with and that have encouraged me along the way and thought, you know, if I thought this was a good idea, fine, go ahead and do it. And I think it's the attitude that there really isn't anything you can't do, and some things work out better than others. You could try them. If they don't work out, it's fine too. You learn from things you don't want to do for the rest of your life too. So it's my time in Kentucky has, when people have said to me, well, what do you do with yourself there? And I say, you know, I don't know. I have too much time. I don't have much time that I don't know what to do with. So it's been a wonderful opportunity moving to East Kentucky and sharing life with people like we have on the panel, and with students and people like you all too. Thank
you. Sarah? Well, you know, it's a cross between going to confession and being in therapy to come to a session like this tonight. You don't know how much you should tell about yourself. You know it has to be true because people can check it out. And I hope it's in some way useful to you all. Excuse me, because you're spending an evening of your lives here with us when there's so many other things that you could be doing, and I'm very grateful for the time you're giving us. I hope we can reciprocate in some measure. As I listened to my fellow panelists talk, Judy's inspiration by her mother, Josephine's educational background, I thought, well, we have more in common than I realized, because I guess our first inspiration really is that family unit. For me, it was mother and father, who were married 13 years, children of the Depression, didn't have a chance to go to college. And when they had me, of course, I was going to college no matter what. There was no choice. There was no staying out a couple of years to figure out what it was all about. And I really wanted them to be pleased. I didn't want them to be disappointed that their number 13 might turn into an unlucky number because they had Rosemary's Baby at the end of that period of time. I wanted to please them, and I wanted to do well in school, and that was sort of the beginning. And I thought that I had life all figured out very early on. I would be a teacher, which was my life's aspiration. And for 10 years of my life, I taught French, Spanish, and government in a little school in Indiana called Henryville, right across the river from Louisville, where I grew up. And Henryville is the school that everyone knows last year at this time was in great distress that blew away in the tornado along with Morgan County, and has come back to life along with Morgan County. Anyway, about 6 years into that teaching career, meanwhile I had been teaching French at night at the University of Louisville with my master's degree, which was in French literature. After 6 years into this teaching career, I thought, you know, I really can't control these kids. They're smoking marijuana in the hallways. They're smoking in the bathrooms, and the principals expected me to control them and show discipline. I am not a disciplinarian by nature. I'm going to have to do something else before they finally figure out that they're going to give me a pink slip because I can't control these kids. Now, the system that I had at this point was I would beg them to behave. And they did. And they would say, why should we behave for you? And I said, because if you don't, the principal's going to figure out I can't control you, and he's going to hire a hag who will control you. So we had a deal. But meanwhile, I figured that line of persuasion was probably short-lived. And I looked in the catalog at the University of Louisville, and the only degree that I could get at night and keep my tenured teaching position was a law degree. Aren't you inspired at what drove me back to law school? It's embarrassing to sit and reflect on the whole truth about this, but it really is. And I tell you that because my life is a mixture of accident and divine providence. I am so grateful that I feared my ability to discipline, because I would never have tried to get a different degree and to do anything else. And I cherish that teaching background because the courtroom has become an expanded classroom for me. I've approached the courtroom all the years that I've been in it, from the time I was a private lawyer to the time I've been on the bench, as an expanded classroom where we share ideas. Along the way, I, of course, was going to night school at this time and teaching by day and driving 100 miles a day to do it, round trip. It's a war story. I only tell you that because it's living proof you can do anything short term if you can just believe that it's going to come to an end, and you'll have a degree that matters at the end. When I started back to law school, I sat at the kitchen table with my wonderful father, who thought I could do anything. And he really was wrong about that, but his faith encouraged me. And I said, Daddy, you know, I'm thinking about getting this law degree. Oh, he said, that's great. I'll help you in any way. Your mother and I are so proud of you. And so I said, but there's a problem. He said, well, what? And I said, well, Daddy, I'm 28 years old. He said, I know how old you are. I was there when you were born. And I said, I'm going to be 31. It's going to take me 3.5 years at night, teaching by day, to get this law degree. And he said, Sarah, honey, you know what? 3.5 years, you're either going to have a law degree or you're not. And I tell you that because every time you undertake a new beginning, you're going to be terrified if you're anything like me. I was so terrified. I was like Judy making those speeches before the General Assembly. My knees knocked as well. I didn't think I could live through this, but I really wanted to do this. And then the providential step came along when the last summer of my law school career, I clerked at a little law firm in Louisville for $3 an hour for a law firm named Tarrant, Combs and Bullitt. Combs, you notice the name. My name was Walter at that time. It later merged a couple of years later into a law firm called Wyatt, Tarrant and Combs, which is now one of the big law firms in our state. The Combs of that law firm was a man who was a good friend of Governor Paul Patton, and probably the person in the room who can understand the rest of my story better than anyone is Governor Patton, because Bert Combs had been governor from 59 to 63, the first major governor from the mountains, to be followed by another major governor from the mountains a few years later. And when I met him the summer of 79, I never dreamed that when he put me to work on a case involving the Scotia mine disaster, that there would never be a moment in my life that he wouldn't continue to be part of it. But it was one of those instant moments in your life where you know nothing will be the same. I guess it was just really, for me, I was totally smitten with him. It was a terrible scandal. He was 37 years my senior. I looked like one of those chiseling gold diggers who was trying to advance her career at the expense of an older man. I mean, the whole scenario was terrible. And they make movies out of this kind of scandal. But anyway, it happened to be the real thing. I was just crazy about him, and to my amazement, he reciprocated. It took us about 10 years to work out the kinks and the troubles in our lives to manage to get married and to build our house in Stanton, Fern Hill. He always wanted to come back to the mountains. And his dream was that he would retire from the law firm. I would give up my job as corporate counsel to a corporation, which I was doing at that time. And we would start a small appellate practice in Stanton, Kentucky. Well, we were about 3 weeks away from that when on the night of the rains were coming in November, the night of December the 3rd, 1991. The rains had been going on for about a week to 10 days, from Thanksgiving till December 3rd. I had to go to probate court that day to settle my father's estate. By now I had lost both of those wonderful parents. And he told me that day, Judge, I always called him Judge because I worked for him, and he had been a judge before he had been governor, and again after he had been governor. I said, I've got to go to Louisville today to settle Daddy's estate. And he said, don't go. It's too bad out there. I said, I must. I've promised myself for Christmas, this is my Christmas present, I'll take good care of his business the way he would have expected me to. And he said, well, honey, I'll tell you what. I know how hard today will be for you. So when I get back from Lexington today, I will start dinner. I will build you a fire. I'll fix a pot of bean soup. I'll pour you a stiff drink, and you'll be glad to get home. And I couldn't find him from about 7 o'clock on when I called to say, you know, I'm on my way home. Is the soup on? Is the fire roaring? I couldn't find him. And so by the time I got to Fern Hill, to our farm, it was apparent to me that he was missing and likely not to be found, although I hoped against hope that he was hurt somewhere. Maybe he'd had an accident and had amnesia, and some nice person had taken him in. But as the night wore on and the state police came and took charge of our situation, they found him the next day in the high water. He had swum to safety. He was clinging to the branch of a tree with his right hand, and they said, you know, if it had been a warm summer night, he would have pulled himself to safety. Such was his strength and tenacity. And so this is really the beginning of where I am now. The teaching career, the law school, was the beginning of how I got to him. He is the beginning and the inspiration for what I'm doing with the rest of my life. That's been 21 years ago. The next day, another good friend of Governor Patton and a good friend of my husband's, Ned Breathitt, who succeeded my husband as governor, came to the farm while they were still searching for him, before they found him. He was there when they retrieved him, and when the word came to the farm that indeed he had been found. And Governor Breathitt turned to me and said, now, Sarah, and he stood me in a corner in the living room, he said, you're going to have to get rid of all these animals. 5 dogs, multiple cats, miniature horses. You're going to have to get rid of all these animals and sell this farm and go back to Louisville, or at least go to Lexington and start your life over. Judge would want you to do that. No woman in her right mind could stay out here on this godforsaken farm all by herself. And I remember telling him, you know, from that emotion that overtakes you, remember telling him, Ned, I can't do that. I've got to stay at Fern Hill and take care of it. I didn't realize that that was prophecy for the rest of my life, and really the motivation, because it was spoken out of the most raw elementary emotion. And as the weeks went on, it became a conviction. And he turned to me, and he was very kind when he said, that's all right, honey. You'll come to your senses soon. And when you do, I'll be here to help you. After months and months went by, and I had not come to my senses, but I had gone down and started our law practice by myself, Ned said, you were right and I was wrong. I said, no, we were both right. You gave me good advice that I didn't have sense enough to take. But I had to do this. And so I packed up my golden retriever, who was my law partner. I didn't have children to take with me to the office. But I'll tell you what, a golden retriever is the next best thing to a baby at the office. He brought in business. He would lie in the door, and I can't tell you how many divorce cases I got because that dog was lying in the door. And children would say, Mommy, look at that dog, and I'd be the lawyer they would come to see. That's really a true story. And my practice turned into this most fulfilling service in a small town. You know, instead of the great big law firm where I had started, and instead of the corporate practice where I had served as general counsel for 7 years, I found myself in a storefront law office on Main Street in Stanton, Kentucky. And against all odds, I made enough money that first year to support the farm. Because God love him, he left me a farm and nothing else. And it was sort of like, you know, that resolution of Scarlett O'Hara, so help me God, I'll never be hungry again. Well, I sort of made my mind up. I will pay the taxes on this place this year if it's the last thing I do. And another year went by, and the next thing I knew, Governor Jones called. And he said, Sarah, there's going to be a vacancy on the Supreme Court of Kentucky, and I want to fill it with a woman. We've never had a woman in that position before. And he and my husband have been friends as well. He knew wonderful governors who were his friends. And I said, well, I know these women. I just started naming some of the wonderful women lawyers in Eastern Kentucky with whom I practiced. And he said, well, what's wrong with you? I said, well, what's wrong with me is I don't know anything about politics, period. And he said, well, you can learn. And I said, well, let's do it this way. I will hold the vacancy on an interim basis from July until the election can be held in November. And then whoever wants to run for the seat can run for it, and I'll just be a caretaker justice on the court. No, he said, if I appoint you, I expect you to run and run vigorously, because if you lose, it's a reflection on me. And I thought, lay the guilt trip on the will, will you? Okay. And I remember my husband told me so many things. He inspired me so many ways. He said, you know, you will never have anything in this life that's worth having unless you risk, unless you're willing to take risks. And the more that you want to achieve, the greater will be the risk you have to take. I had never been a risk taker in my life. And that was the beginning of taking the risks, because he was willing to do it too. And he saw how important it was for him to take that risk, to run from the mountains of Eastern Kentucky. Nobody knew him. He was a Court of Appeals judge, the old Supreme Court of Kentucky at that time. The little judge from the mountains with a very pronounced twang. And he took a chance and ran for governor and remade the face of the state. Governor Patton did the same thing some 20 years later. Well, more than that, some 35 years later. And those Eastern Kentucky men who took a chance on losing everything before the entire state of Kentucky transformed this state. And so that risk-taking is a very, very important thing I would pass on to you from someone who's really not a risk-taker. Couldn't even control the kids in the high school, I thought, without begging them to behave. And so one risk led to another. I ran that fall, and lo and behold, as I predicted, I lost the election. One vote per precinct to another woman, to Janet Stumbo, who was on the Court of Appeals at that time. And so the newspapers were full of stories, and they said, and I will tell you, it gets so painful when you run for office. It's the most painful thing I can imagine doing. The newspapers carried stories. Instead of saying Sarah Combs is going to be a risk taker and try to follow in her husband's footsteps, they called me, quote, direct quote from the Courier-Journal, a product of political cronyism who would amount to nothing if it hadn't been for a famous man's name. And you know, it's a reality. It's the truth, only it wasn't political cronyism. I would never have had this chance to serve had it not been for the fact that he brought me to the mountains and he left me here, and people believed in him. And maybe they believed that he hadn't been such a fool in marrying this woman, and they gave me a chance, because I only lost by one vote per precinct. And so Governor Jones called me at Fern Hill the next morning, where I was never going to take a risk ever again, and he said, Sarah, you did great yesterday. And I said, Governor, have you seen the paper? Even the Courier-Journal with those acid editorials got it right. I lost that election yesterday. Direct quotation, Governor. He said, yes, but not by nearly as much as we all thought you were going to lose that race. They knew something I didn't know, and they knew something they hadn't told me. And he said, I'm going to appoint you to the vacancy on the Court of Appeals, Judge Stumbo's seat. And I said, wait a minute, I'm catching on to this. This means if I'm appointed, I have to run again, right? He said, right. And I said, I'm finished with politics the rest of my life. I have a law practice. I have a farm to support. I have 5 dogs. Now I have 8. And I had many cats. I have 6 now, 7 miniature horses. I said, I have these animals to feed. No, thank you. He said, you will run this time and you will win. And I guess he taught me a lesson and inspired me to get back on the horse after I'd fallen off, and I did. And that was in January of 1994, and I am now in my 20th year on the Kentucky Court of Appeals. I've had the honor of serving for 6 of those 20 years as a chief judge of the court. I've had almost 1,900 cases that I've authored myself, and 4,000 other cases that I've presided over. I've been on the court longer than anyone else. Thank God I'm not chronologically the oldest person on the court. Almost. Seniority-wise, I have the numbers. Chronologically, I do have a couple of people who've got that advantage over me. But let me tell you what it has meant to me to do this. My dream was to keep Fern Hill, not to let go of one thing that we had in common, our only child and those animals. It was only because I loved that man that I wanted to stay and do work that I thought would preserve his farm and would be the kind of legacy that he would be proud of, because he loved the law. He believed the law was a way that we fend off anarchy, that we preserve civilization, rule of law. He devoted his life to that. And I thought if I could serve him in a way with the law and keep Fern Hill too, that perhaps that would be something that he would be proud of and say, see, I wasn't such a fool when I married her after all. And that's always been with me. I've always wanted him to be able to look back and say, I took a chance on her and she didn't disappoint me. And you know something, I know that sounds ridiculous to spend your life wanting to serve someone's memory, but it can inspire you to do more than if you're trying to do it just for yourself. It's much more fulfilling, it's much more satisfying to think, would he be pleased? And these cases that have come along, I am so grateful that I was here to make a difference in some cases that might not have been decided the same way. I'll tell you about just one, and then I will stop. But today, you're aware that a major argument was held before the United States Supreme Court in a very emerging area of the law. I sat on a case 4 years ago called Padilla versus the Commonwealth of Kentucky, P-A-D-I-L-L-A, Padilla. And this was an immigration case, and this was when immigration was in much more flux as an issue, social issue, than it is now. I'll tell you in just a very brief fashion, Mr. Padilla entered into a plea bargain. He was a Vietnam veteran who had served his country well, but he was born in Honduras, left Honduras at the age of 2, never became a naturalized citizen, and after serving in Vietnam, fell into some hard times, was arrested in Hardin County with contraband in the truck that he was driving, and entered into a plea bargain with the Commonwealth that he would be released if he would plead guilty and so forth and so on. So he asked his lawyer, is there any chance I can be deported if I take this deal? His lawyer said, oh, absolutely not. Well, it was wrong advice. It was absolutely wrong advice. And when a lawyer gives a client wrong advice in the law, that client, that defendant, can ask the court for what's called an 1142 motion. And that simply means I've had ineffective assistance of counsel such that I didn't really have a lawyer. I need another trial. I'm entitled to another trial. I wrote the case saying, yes, you are. Meanwhile, there was another case on the books in Kentucky called Furtado. Very similar, like fingerprints these cases were, except one distinguishing feature. Mr. Furtado never asked his lawyer that question. Could I possibly be deported? And our Chief Justice of the Supreme Court at that time, Joe Lambert, had written the Furtado case, and he wrote it this way. He said, the lawyer who handled the case was a criminal lawyer, not an immigration specialist. He didn't have any duty, therefore, to offer advice on immigration law. Well, one distinguishing feature in my case, I was serving then as the Chief Judge of our court. I didn't know that that was a bad omen, probably, from one chief to another. But I wrote the case saying because he affirmatively asked the question, his lawyer was put on notice that he had to give the right advice about immigration law, even though he was a criminal lawyer. 2-3 decision on our court. And I held my fingers and I crossed them, and I hoped this case would go up and be decided the way I had written it. And I was reversed. The Supreme Court of Kentucky said, wrong. Furtado governs this case. Well, you know, I've been reversed a few times after writing 1,850, almost 1,900 cases. And you kind of get used to it. It's never really very pleasant. But this time, I was in a really affirmatively bad mood about it. And I tried to forget it, and I kept thinking, it just ain't fair. And there is a saying from Charles Dickens, if that is the law, then the law is an ass. And that's how I felt about this case. Couldn't say it out loud for fear that I'd get hauled before the Judicial Conduct Commission. So I'm standing in front of the whole world tonight, you know, in front of you and this television camera, taking a risk, I guess. It went on. Little to my knowledge did I have any idea this would happen. But it went on beyond our Supreme Court. Seldom does a case leapfrog from the Supreme Court of Kentucky to the United States Supreme Court. Almost never, unless it's a death penalty case. But immigration law was so very much in flux at that time, 4 years ago. Okay, 2009, January of 2009, I had a massive flood at my farm. All of my husband's memorabilia, almost everything was lost. It was just such a mess. Water pipe broke in the basement, 11,000 gallons of water all over the place. This went on for months as I tried to write the cases by day and clean up the farm by night. When one morning in April, my staff attorney came in from Lexington and said, "Sarah, have you heard the good news?" And I said, "Not for 4 months have I heard any good news." She said, "The United States Supreme Court has granted certiorari, which means discretionary review, of Padilla." And my best friend and I got in my little Toyota Scion XA and drove to Washington, D.C. for the oral arguments like what were held today. And they came out, these justices from behind the velvet curtains, and they started staccato-like asking the questions, one after another. And finally, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg asked the clincher question. She said it this way: "Mr. Solicitor General, arguing for the government, don't you think it highly likely, or at least highly probable, that if Mr. Padilla had known when he accepted that plea bargain on wrong advice, that if he could have served out his sentence, gone to jail, gone to prison, taken his medicine, he would have chosen to do that where he could have had the comfort of his family there to visit him, rather than to be exiled for the rest of his life?" And she said it this way: "And are you aware that banishment or exile, either way it's phrased, either is tantamount to the death penalty in many cultures?" Well, I felt hopeful when I heard her phrase the question that way. And the question really came down to this: those inalienable rights that Jefferson wrote about, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, those inalienable rights should not be an accident of citizenship, but should be part and parcel of the human being that we are. They should transcend borders. That's what that case was really about: due process of law and fair play. A few months later, 5 months later, the United States Supreme Court handed down a 7-2 decision, reversing the Supreme Court of Kentucky and reinstating the opinion that I had written in Padilla versus Kentucky. That, ladies and gentlemen, is how the law changes. And instead of it taking more than 50 years, as it did with Plessy v. Ferguson and Brown v. Board of Education, when civil rights took more than 50 years to be resolved in the courts, it took a mere 5 months after the oral argument for this case to turn around and for a major step in immigration law to be achieved. And to see the system work, and to think that you can be part of something like that in whatever field you pursue, you are going to make a difference. My husband used to always quote President Kennedy, who said 2 things that he liked best of all. He loved President Kennedy. They were contemporaries. He said President Kennedy used to say, "Never send a boy to do a man's job, send a woman." And the favorite thing he quoted was, he said that to please me, I think. His favorite quotation was, "Every person can make a difference, and everyone should try." That was the philosophy of Burt Combs by way of John F. Kennedy. That's what I believe should be our philosophy. Every person can make a difference, and everyone must try. And that's why you're here in this wonderful school, and that's why you're spending an evening with us. And that's why I'm so honored to be with you, and thank you for listening to my odyssey, such as it was. So I appreciate your time.
First of all, I want to say thank you to Dr. Lopresto for inviting me here, and thank you to these lovely ladies for welcoming me to this panel. It's a little intimidating being up here with these women, but I'm originally from Houston, Texas, actually Pasadena, Texas. I grew up with both my parents. I have an older brother, and my whole life, my brother and I were involved in every sport possible. You name it, we played it. Every weekend, we were out playing baseball, softball, soccer, basketball, anything. And that's how we stayed busy. And I grew up playing sports. And my main sport was softball. And my whole life, everybody who knew me, my family, everybody knew I was gonna go to college and play softball. Well, my junior year of high school, I tore my rotator cuff, and the doctor basically told me, you know, you can have surgery, but you'll never be the same, you'll never be able to pitch again. So it was kind of depressing, because it's what I based my life around, and that's what I planned on going to college for. Well, thankfully, I'd always bowled on the side, and I started bowling in high school for fun. And I was just, one day I literally was just laying around. I was like, how am I going to go to college now? Because I knew my parents weren't going to pay for it. And I was like, well, maybe I can get a scholarship for bowling. And when I would tell people about this, they're like, what? They get scholarships for bowling? And they get that same reaction today when I tell people I go to college for bowling. And I ended up going to collegebowling.com because I knew nothing about college bowling really. I just went to collegebowling.com hoping there was a website for it. Luckily there was. And I started emailing coaches from different schools. And I got a couple of responses, and honestly I was not that good at all. I just bowled a little on the side and I said, well, maybe I can get a scholarship, who knows. Well, luckily I got a phone call one day from Ron Dameron, and I'd never heard of Pikeville before. I mean, never really knew anything about Kentucky. And he called me and he wanted me to come out to the recruit tournament. And my parents were like, what? Pikeville, Kentucky? How did we get there? And luckily my mom took me, brought me to Pikeville, Kentucky. We took a plane and we had one of the bowlers pick us up, came here for the recruit tournament, and I had no idea what to expect. I didn't know how small of a town it was, and I came here, and I don't know how, but somehow I fell in love with Pikeville. And I ended up signing my scholarship that weekend, and my mother cried, bawled her eyes out, so did my father. And fall of 2010, I packed up my things, and my parents drove me the 18 hours from Pasadena, Texas to Pikeville, Kentucky. And never in a million years would I have guessed that it would have brought me to where I am today. When I got here, I was bored out of my mind. Coming from Houston, Texas, where there's everything to do, coming to Pikeville, population of 7,000, I had no idea what to do. Bowling entertained me and kept me busy. And then I didn't get a full scholarship, and I knew my parents, they would pay for it, but the thing is I didn't want them to pay for it. So one day I was walking around school, and I saw a sign for ROTC, and I was like, well, let me go see what this is about. And honestly, the thing that appealed to me was the money. Can't lie about that. And I went and talked to them, and I didn't tell my parents, they had no idea. And they told me what my options were, and next May I shipped off to basic training. My parents were a little depressed about that. They bawled their eyes out, of course. And I came back in January 2012, excuse me. And I came back with definitely new experiences. When I was in training, my grandmother passed away, who actually was very close to me. I had to go home on emergency leave when she passed away, and that was actually very hard on me because at school, every day, usually I would call my mom, call my dad, and then I would always call my grandma. And then when I came back to school the following January, I would call my mom, I would call my dad, and then one day I was sitting there, I was like, I'm missing something, you know, who else am I supposed to call? And then it hit me, I was like, I'm supposed to call my grandma. Well, I couldn't, but for inspiration, it would have to be my family as a whole, my mother, my father, my grandmother. They were always the ones who told me, you know, you can do whatever you want. You take an idea, just go with it. Be a go-getter, make something happen for yourself. Don't wait for it to come to you. And they still tell that to me to this day. I tell them what I'm doing, and they're just like, we just can't believe what you're doing with your life, because nobody in my family ever went to college. My brother went to college for a few semesters, and he dropped out. And then they definitely didn't imagine me coming to Pikeville, Kentucky, but they knew I would get out and go somewhere. And then when I came back in January, there was the Mountain Laurel competition here on campus, and I don't know what inspired me to even do it, because being a girl from Texas, this is a competition for women from Kentucky, but somehow I ended up winning, and I had the honor of representing the university last summer, and that was an honor in itself. I had some amazing experiences, and I want people to know that if you have an idea in your head, something that you want to do, you can do it. You can make it happen. I know everybody has something they want to do with their life. You have all these dreams and goals, and you might think, oh, that's impossible for me to do. No, it's not. You can go out, do anything you want to do. I always told myself, I want to go out, get away from home, experience college. And that's what I did. I sent a few emails, and I got a reply. And that's how I ended up here. And that's all you have to do. Just, if you have a goal, reach for it, go for it, do what you have to do. There's plenty of people, especially here on campus, they're willing to help you. Just be inspired by your goals, and don't wait for them to happen, make them happen. And I'm just so, I guess, lucky to be here and continuing to go after what I want. I have one more year left, and I'm hoping to go to law school at UK or U of L, and I just hope that that'll continue to drive me towards whatever comes next in my mind, because every day I want to do something new. My mind changes about what I want to do here, what I want to do there, but you'll change your mind too. You'll have an idea, you'll have a goal, and then you'll be on the right track for that, and something else will come up. Something better will come up, and you'll be like, oh wow, I can do this too. And just go with it. Don't be afraid. And don't be afraid to get out and travel and do what you have to do to make your dreams come true. Because whatever you want to happen with your life, you can make it happen. And I can promise you that, because if you want it to happen, you'll find a way to make it happen.
Well, on that positive note, I'm still living 4 different lives here. It feels like now we need to take a deep breath and come back to planet Earth. But I'd like for you to join the discussion here and ask the panelists whatever it is you would like to know. You have the opportunity here to get in touch with 4 very interesting people who are quite willing to share more. And Dr. Van Cleve is somewhere ready with a microphone.
I have a question for you, Dr. Van Cleve. How do you get through, you mentioned fear, how do you, and I'm sure each of you have had times where you've faced fear, what gets you through that?
Well, I believe to overcome my fear of speaking, excuse me, public speaking, as I said before, I have this passion. And I truly believe that no woman or no child should ever be abused by anybody. That's something we all have to say no to and make it aware to everybody. And times are changing. We are beginning to realize that it's a no-no. You don't abuse a child, you don't abuse women. And it is a crime. So I believe I felt so strongly about that over time, it got easier and easier. But it was still there a little bit, but then you know what you accomplish by overcoming your fear. And we have a lot of fears about everything. But if you work on it, and if you feel so deeply about it, you can overcome your fears.
I've actually experienced a lot of fear. There was fear coming here to Pikeville. There was fear, I think, the most fear was when I was shipping off to basic training, and my parents, I think they were more scared than I was, and they would ask me, aren't you scared? And my response was, yes, I'm scared, but if it wasn't possible, it wouldn't have happened. Nobody else would have done it before. And just my mindset was, all these women have done it before, all these men have done it before. There's nothing to be scared of. Because if something is going to go wrong, not all these people would be doing it. And same thing coming here to Pikeville. If there was something to be scared about, nobody would leave home for college, nobody would travel out of state for college, leave hours from home, and just whatever your fear is, most likely somebody's been there before and they've overcome that fear. So just be confident that since they've overcome their fear, you will too.
When I was young, I was terrified of going to school every day. Literally. I've never done anything in my life I hadn't been terrified, including coming and talking to you all tonight. It never gets easier. And I used to ask my father, when am I going to get over being scared, Daddy? And he'd say, I'm going to remind you what Franklin D. Roosevelt told us all during the Depression. You have nothing to fear but fear itself. And then my husband would tell me the same thing. I'd say, when am I going to get so I can go in a courtroom and not be so scared my knees are knocking like castanets? And he said, if you're not afraid, you won't be any good. The day you go into a courtroom and you're not afraid is the day you cease to be effective. And so the message in that is that there is no greater force in life than fear. That's the line I've just memorized from The Life of Pi. I've been reading that incredible book for the first time. I had it for 10 years, never opened it until the movie came out. But in The Life of Pi, there's a long section that deals with fear and says it's the most debilitating, overwhelming emotion in all of human nature. And so what can you do with it? You can channel it for the good. Nothing to fear but fear itself. Recognize it, look it in the eye and say, there's something I must do that's greater than you, fear. I have a duty, I have a service to perform, and you're in my way. And as long as you think of something greater than the fear, namely your obligation to get beyond it because someone's counting on you, or you have a dream to achieve, then you can handle it. And I believe Dr. Van Cleve is probably the most important thing that we all deal with. Certainly, according to The Life of Pi, you have.
I can actually, I don't really, I've not had many fears in my life. I think the one thing that I do remember is just a fear of something happening to my children. And it was unfounded, but I did fear that something would happen to them. And the one time we were in Europe, and our youngest daughter was tired of waiting for something painting we were looking at in Italy, and she was out of sight. And she was about 9 years old at the time. And I can remember I could not move. I couldn't, and I felt like, here it is, this is exactly what I've been worried about. But ultimately we found her. But that was the closest thing I came to being absolutely just so unbelievably terrified.
Other questions? Here's your opportunity. Mary.
Can't get the microphone, but you have to talk loud. Ask the
We have a
question.
young man coming. Yeah. Hi.
Mary says you should go first. I think Mary will be next. She'll be next in line. Brandon, go ahead.
What do you think is the major obstacle that society places against women from being treated equal in the workplace community?
Good question.
From a military standpoint, obviously, it's finally in the military, women are now allowed to be in combat in infantry, but it's still hard to justify why women should be in infantry, and I understand why women want to fight, to be able to fight for their own country, literally in infantry, being in combat, being on the front lines. But in my opinion, women are still on a different scale. When it comes to the Army, we have different standards for our physical fitness test, and there's reasons why women weren't allowed in combat before, and there's two main reasons. One, because physically women are not made to be as strong as men, and which to me that's okay, because I can still fulfill my duties in the military and do what's asked of me. And then secondly, women have more of that motherly instinct, and when on the battlefield they see someone shot right before their eyes, they're more likely to stay behind and not be able to continue and finish the mission. And that's kind of the biggest obstacle women face, is having these natural obstacles, physically not being able to be as fast or as strong as men, and then having that motherly instinct of wanting to tend to somebody that can't be tended to anymore.
I think Andrea's hit on something very, very important. That is the fundamental difference in how we're wired. Women have inherently the more sensitive and intuitive side, and men have the more physically aggressive, strong side. And I guess my question would be, why would we settle for 50% of what God has given the human race when we can have it all, when we can combine and have the two genders with their two strengths represented? I think one of the principal reasons why women have been held back perhaps in the professional world is a perception that we are going to cave in and take care of our personal lives at the expense of our professional lives. When, in fact, of course, a sacrifice is required, but the balance can be had, and successful women know how to do both. And it means tremendous personal sacrifice. It means staying up late at night during the Christmas season if you're going to get the Christmas presents wrapped and the meal cooked, while the men of the house might be asleep and taking good rest. You're having to do more. But you know, there's an old saying also that women are expected to be, let's see, how does it go? Have to be twice as good have to work twice as hard to be thought half as good. And fortunately, that's not a problem for women. They're willing to work twice as hard. But I hope that the half as good part goes away.
And also in corporate America, that last sentence is hard to break through for women. Now, for men, it's easy. They said, you know, he's a good guy. He's going places. He's tough. He knows how it's done. But you know, when a woman breaks that glass ceiling, she's not called all of those things. She's called something worse. So it is hard for a woman to break. It's getting better. I think now corporate America can see that women are important. They do contribute in their own different way. I think women as a whole, we think different. It's true. Men's from Mars, women's from Venus. And we do need a woman's view, especially in politics. But what I don't understand, women voters are 53% who vote, but they will not vote for a woman when she's on the ballot. See, I cannot understand that. If all women who vote, 53 or 55% who votes, if they voted for a woman on the ballot, we'd have all kinds of women legislators, not only in Kentucky, but in Washington too, where it's needed. Okay. I get on the Iowa.
Well, I think that speaks to the idea of supporting women who are other women who are competent and willing to get out there in front and lead. I shared a piece with Jean earlier. The book review of the New York Times within the last 2 weeks has an article with some research on why women don't haven't broken through the glass ceiling. And some of the problem has been that women do not take the lead. That we're just educated a little differently, and it's getting a whole lot better. When I was my senior year of college, I took the LSAT because I thought I might want to go to law school. And I took it at Fairfield University in Fairfield, Connecticut, which is a Jesuit male university. And the test was given, the exam was given in an auditorium, and I was the only woman there. And it was, every other seat was occupied by a guy. And it was very intimidating. It really was. But I think obviously there's so many more women going to law school. It's better than 50% of every class are women, as is medical school. And I think things have really changed in this 50 years or so, which is great. But I do think we have to encourage women to seek office, and we have to support them financially if we can, but certainly by working for and with them. We have the opportunities, we just need to take them. But we need to support competent women too. Sometimes there are women that are running that are not the best of our gender, and I think we need to, or not all they could be either, but we need to support those who are.
Dr. Freeman, who may be the only one in this room who has a women's studies certificate, so we better be prepared here.
I think we can't underestimate the conflict, though, that professional women face with their family lives. If we look at the education process, women aren't finished with their education until they're approaching 30. If we look at women's biological clocks and when it's possible for them to have a family, it would then naturally fall right in that decade when women can rise to the top in their field. So if it's in academia, it's women in the tenure track position. If it's in law, it's making partner. Those things usually occur in a woman's 30s. So it doesn't leave a lot of time for raising a family, for having children. So we see that glass ceiling, I think, really begin in a woman's 30s because they get stalled there in their career if they want to have a family. And it's not the same for men, for obvious reasons that I don't need to remind everyone of. But this will continue to be a problem, and we see pictures sort of mocking women who are breastfeeding in professional settings, or even in public, not even in professional settings, but in public. We give women a hard time if they have to bring a child to a meeting. You see that on the one hand, and yet we expect women to have families, to have children, and in fact, sort of socially, we still view women as being odd if they never had a family, never had children. So I think these are conflicts and complexities that really have to be addressed as we move forward as professional women.
Very good thinking, and of course a lot of this touches on so many components, social components, tradition, services that businesses would have to provide, that the public would have to provide. So often we compare ourselves, this country, with European countries where daycare is taken for granted, where companies just automatically provide that kind of services, comes with a job. So there are issues beyond our control, and Hannah is right. Yes, you're expected to have children. If not, then so when will she ever have one? That, isn't she about that age? And if you do become pregnant, then oh goodness, now she's going to bring that baby to the office. It's true, you know. So there are issues involved with that. Next year we may have to have somebody on this panel who has more experience with that. Right, Teresa? Sorry.
I want to say, well, first off, thank you for kind of sharing your journeys and whatnot, and taking your time out to speak with us. I mean, I came here honestly for extra credit, but I really did enjoy it, and that's why I stayed the whole time. I learned a lot, and I enjoyed what I heard. But more towards the question, we spoke about fear and how fear was a driving factor in success for all of you. I want to look more to like a positive view going forward. What positively, what's a good thing that really drove you all to be successful and to want to help and be somebody, I guess, of a helpful position?
I think personally for me that I was just very open to doing new things, and not being afraid to try something. And if it didn't work out, I would try something else. And I think an openness about, I basically have a feeling that the world is good, that people are good, and that any place you are, it's what you make of it. And in your life, you shape your life as well as the opportunity shaping you.
Well, like I said, my mother was my inspiration. And I guess because I wanted to be like her and to make lives better for other people. So I got over my fear so I could make lives better for other people and the next generations.
I have found my solace in public service. And Dr. Lepresto mentioned earlier that many of us would probably be doing much better financially when she was given the figures if we weren't in some of the fields we are. I can assure you that would be the case with the judiciary. We haven't had a salary adjustment in 6 years. And private law practice is much more lucrative. But the public service aspect of what I do is so incredibly enriching and so much more fulfilling at an emotional level and at a psychological level that I can't imagine departing from this as long as the people will have me and I can continue to make a contribution. Now, Governor Patton, I'd say that with a caveat that I could be a much better contributor if I were in private practice. Pikeville College would benefit much more materially. But I hope that some of the intangibles will redound to the benefit of Pikeville College, those intangibles that are part and parcel of the public service.
Well, honestly, I think I'm still trying to figure out what is motivating me and inspiring me to do something with my life. But I think right now what's driving me is the motivation that I have the ability to do whatever I want with my life. I can make it whatever I want. I can be whatever I want to be. And that's because I have some kind of fire in me that just continues to motivate me every day and to be the best that I can be every single day. And right now I'm planning to go to law school. Who knows, that could change next week or tomorrow. But whatever it is that I do or end up doing, whatever I end up being, it comes from some kind of motivation inside of me. And I think growing up, hearing from my parents, you can do whatever you want, make something of yourself, you know, get out of Pasadena, go do what you want. Again, I don't think they expected Pikeville, Kentucky, but I'm still doing something, and I'm just grateful that I have this motivation inside of me that is driving me to make something of myself. And I hope that you all can find that motivation inside of you to go out and be a go-getter and be whatever you want. Because I know you hear people say all the time, oh, you can be whatever you want to be, and people just blow it off. No, it's true. If you have a dream, find that fire inside of you to fulfill that dream. And once you find it, you won't let anything stop you.
Let me share a quotation with you from my favorite French author, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. And he made this statement one time. He said that within each one of us, there's a spark of genius that ends up compromised, that ends up destroyed because we compromise it either out of fear or selling ourselves short. And this is the way he phrased it. He said, within each of us, there is a little Mozart assassinated. That spark of genius, the Mozart. And we assassinate it, we lobotomize it, because we fall short of developing it and nurturing it. And you know, I think the best thing I could ask you to do is identify your Mozart, your passion, your drive, and never, never, never let it be assassinated. Nurture it, keep it safe, let it flourish.
Congratulations on all of you ladies for being, having been and continuing to be positive role models for especially the young people in the audience here. My question is, what could colleges and universities, specifically UPIKE, what might they do to make sure that especially young women reach their highest potential? Are there any suggestions toward the university?
I just think they're educating people, and that's probably the most important part of it. I don't think anybody, or I doubt that any of us reached our potential when we were first out of school, but I think it's an opportunity to explore, to learn about what there is in the world and what there is in humanity that you want to be a part of, a close part of, and then follow that.
And I agree, like I said first and before, you're here for education. That's the most important thing you're doing right now, because that will make your life a lot better. You can be anything or go anywhere else you got education. And that's the most important thing that your parents has offered you and this college has offered you. So take full advantage of it. I mean, full advantage for everything they offer. Get involved with, if you're not in sports, a committee, with the community. Volunteer. Because truthfully, your learning experience is going to be with you the rest of your life, and it's going to guide you.
I alluded earlier to my 10 years in teaching. And one of the most marvelous memories I have is the relationship I had with many, many students. I think the best thing that the school can do to help young women and students in general is for teachers to take that personal interest that they can't resist doing. Good teachers never just teach a subject. Good teachers become friends and counselors and advisors to young people. And seek out those people who care about you. Let them help you. And you teachers and administrators, remember that you have more to teach than just subject matter. That the lives you touch and shape may turn that subject matter into a real profession for someone with the right kind of personal encouragement.
I think what every student needs is what Pikeville offers, and that's opportunity. I came here not having any idea what I wanted to do with my life. And Pikeville really opened up too many doors, actually. Some days I don't know what to do because I have so much to do, but not even just women, the males as well, just take advantage of this education that you're being offered, because not everybody gets this opportunity. And so many people would kill to have an opportunity for an education that you're being offered here at Pikeville. I know some people may say, oh, I get so bored here, oh, it's terrible, but it is what you make it. And if you have this mindset, oh, I'm bored, I'm miserable, then yes, you're gonna be miserable. Just make it what you want it to be. If you want to have fun, if you want to have a good time in college, then you'll have a good time in college because you'll find something to do. You'll find something that interests you. And Pikeville, you can do anything you want because they're a school of opportunity. If you have an idea of a club or an organization that you want to start, you can do it here at Pikeville. They are all for it. And I just encourage you, especially if you have an idea of some kind of club or organization, make that your goal to get that started and get that off the ground here at Pikeville, because they will let you do anything that you want.
And I also want to say you have great faculty here. They're a caring faculty. They care about you. Honestly, they go anywhere else and make a heck of a lot more money. But they know a small college, one-on-one with their students, is the most important thing in the world. So take advantage of this faculty who cares so much for you too.
That's very true. Again, coming here, I had no idea what to expect. And I always thought, oh, I want to go to a big university. I want to do this at a big university because I can do this or that. But then I realized here at Pikeville, I can go in randomly, go see a teacher and sit down with them and talk to them for 30 minutes or an hour. And at a big university, that's not possible. You'll be lucky to even say hi to them in the classroom. And you just, I don't think a lot of students realize how lucky they are to have that opportunity to create that relationship with their teachers.
Of course, I'm particularly happy to hear those words. Have we just about run out of...
Well, I have a question.
Excellent.
Well, like Andrea said, I came here and I have so many opportunities, which leads me to my question. Sometimes I feel overwhelmed by my opportunities, and I feel like I don't give up, but sometimes you feel like it's so far away from me, I feel like I need to give up. Do you guys have any advice for people that are struggling with like what they want to do with their opportunities when they feel like giving up? Like, how do they keep going? How do they push through that?
I think realize that what you're feeling is so totally natural, that you're going to probably have many careers in the course of your life, and that whatever choice you make at this point may be just the threshold to another career that you will have later on. Remember, I went from teaching Spanish, French, government, to becoming a private lawyer in a big law firm, to go into a small town and becoming a small town attorney, and then to service on 2 courts. I mean, one thing leads to another. It's really the thread of providence in your life. If you will just not give up, because if you give up, you have nothing rather than the next step.
If you feel like your goal is far out of sight, that you feel like you want to achieve it, just embrace the journey and know that you'll get there eventually with your hard work. It might be years, months, weeks, but eventually you'll get there. And just make the most of what you're doing to get there. And just embrace the journey. You'll have fun along the way.
May I say something too? I'm all about embracing the journey, but I'm also a very practical person. So I fully understand the frustration, because let me tell you, about 4 weeks ago, I was exactly there. I had this list of things to do, and all great things. I wanted to do them all, starting with Rotary, then the dogs, then travel, then I had 5 books that I desperately want to read, and the papers need to be graded, and I do need sleep. So I know exactly what you mean, and you have all these other things you are responsible for. The beauty of your life right now, the way I see it, is you at least don't have to take out, well, you do have to take out the trash, but you don't have some of the other household, family life responsibilities. So you can really, for these 4 years, focus on yourself. So that's the good news. Let's think positively here. And then the other good news is you're being trained to think, and to think logically. So that's what I remind myself of. And I literally did that. Otherwise, I wouldn't have made it through spring break. I sat down and I literally prioritized what is most important right now in my life, and what gives me right now the most bang for the buck. If I do an hour of this, what will fulfill me the most? And sometimes, because we have so little time, and that pertains to both genders, I would say equally, to women sometimes more. Sometimes it takes being that drastic with your time. It's a limited commodity. You have to just let some things go. And if that means turning off the computer, just being drastic about it, I, for one, don't have a television. What I need to know about the rest of the world, I get in other ways that I can control better, I think. But I just have to be very vigilant and very diligent about, I have only so much time and I want to make the most of it. Maybe at your age, time is not as important, but when you're getting to be over 50, it is. So yes, you want to squeeze every minute for the most it is, and that's what Andrea reminded me of when she spoke earlier, and what both of you reminded me of. When you said, Josephine, you're open to every opportunity. Most people think that I'm very open to new opportunities because I came from Germany at age 25 with a suitcase. Yes and no, and that was very scary. But I'm also very rooted. I am here and I'm planted now. I'm a tree and I'm not very mobile. And I'm probably the last person who has had one job, one career, and one employer. Out of graduate school, this was my first employer, and it looks like it's going to be my last. So that's very unusual. So how do I make that interesting enough? You will have 3 different careers in your lifetime, not just jobs. So my recipe for that is, I've always said, if I ever wake up one morning and I really, really don't want to do what I like doing, I will find myself a sales job at Talbot's. Maybe we need to cut that because it's advertising, I don't know. But then it's time to really look for something else. That time hasn't come yet, mostly because every evening I can find something in the day that has been worthwhile, and it's not always job related, because if the job is every single day the most important thing, then I don't think the balance has been struck. Some days it may be, but if it's every day the most important thing, then I would really worry about my sanity. So, I don't know. Prioritizing. How do you do it?
We're about on the same page. One thing, if it's too overwhelming, sit back, take a deep breath, relax, and say, what is important to me? What do I want to accomplish in my life? And true, you're going to change jobs probably 3 or 4 times, maybe more. You'll be married, you'll have children. You may want to be a stay-at-home mother. Start a daycare. There's so many more things out there, but at this particular time, just sit back and say, what is important right now? I think tomorrow you're going to change your mind. You know. So don't try to cram it all in at one time. You've got your whole life. Don't be overwhelmed by one day. Sometimes I get overwhelmed. I think I took on too much. I'm in too many clubs. I'm on too many boards. But then again, I sit back and say, this is what I want to do. This is me. This is what I want to contribute. And how I want to spend the rest of my life contributing to other people and to society. So just lay back, take a deep breath. Tomorrow's another day.
I have one piece, and this is as a mother who's had 3 of her children through college and graduate school and a few other things. Get enough sleep. You feel a lot better and you can handle things when you have enough sleep behind you. And that's always the thing that you say, oh, I don't have to sleep today, I can do it, I'll have extra time on Saturday. But try to regulate it so that you find, or at least I have found, and I know my children did, that when they were short of sleep and they had a lot of stress and they'd call me at 11:30 at night and tell me about it, then they would relax and I'd be up worrying about them. So I really, and you mentioned sleep, and you mentioned it too, that it's very important to take care of your physical health as well.
And just relax.
Sure.
But not too much sleep.
Get them sleep.
Yes. Was that a question, or was it?
Are you leaving?
We've been talking about like what to do and how to have a successful mindset, but like what about who you know? Like how do you get out there and meet somebody that can take you to the next level? Because it's not all about what you know sometimes. People say it's who you know too.
So you're talking about networking?
Yeah.
What have you heard about networking? So you're talking about it in class, and you're encouraged to do that?
If you got something that you want to do, and you get good at it, you still got to get recognized to be successful at it. So how do you meet somebody that can help take you to the next level?
Well, Andrea can speak to that. Andrea, what do you do? You've already mentioned some strategies. Andrea is very good at this.
Well, networking is very important because you're right, it's not always what you know, but who you know. And whenever you're at an event, especially like this, if you just randomly go up to different people, Miss Sarah Combs, Miss Judy Patton, Miss Josephine Robinson, get to know them and just introduce yourself. I think that's the biggest fear that a lot of people have, because I have the same fear. And sometimes I'll just be sweating inside, but you just have to overcome the fear of going up to a random person and introducing yourself. Because once you introduce yourself, a lot of these people will be impressed that you actually do introduce yourself. And they'll ask you your story, you might ask them their story, and they might not be the person that you need to know, but they might know someone that you need to know. And people are always willing to help you out. People always want to help young people, especially, get those connections that they need to get ahead in the world. So whenever, not just here, but anywhere, maybe you're waiting to get seated at a restaurant, just casually bring up a random conversation like, oh, this wait's terrible, I could be doing this, I could be doing that. Just any little small talk, that really gets people going, especially older people. They love when younger people just randomly come up to them and start random conversations. They find that interesting because a lot of people don't do that today, because the younger generation's stuck on their phones, stuck on their cell phones, texting. So when you actually go up to them and initiate the conversation, they'll be impressed just by that.
She's so right about that. We're flattered when you notice us. We're grateful when you notice us. But never hesitate to ask either when you meet people, and continue to expose yourself to places where you'll meet people, every age group. But when you find some common ground, don't hesitate to ask, because people really do want to pass it on. That's the expression. Somebody helped every single one of us. No, not one of us would be doing what we are without the help of others. And it's such a pleasure when someone asks me to write a letter of recommendation, or do you know someone who can help me get an internship, or this summer or next summer, can you help me get into law school? Any way that someone asks me for help, I'm thrilled to do it. All you have to do is ask. Let them know that you need help.
Can you help me?
Sure, I'll do my best. See? Work in progress.
Well, yeah.
I know you can find many mentors anywhere. As I keep saying, for the young generation, get involved in your community. Get involved with that circle of, whether it be volunteer work, social work, clubs, and let them know who you are. Just like ask. And we all know that we're here to help the next generation because we want you all to survive. We want you to do well. We want you to make a better life. Then you don't keep us up. But honestly, we're there to help you. And you'll find that anywhere you go. Just ask.
So the first step is do exactly what Andrea does. Go to office hours, talk to faculty, find yourself a club, figure out what your special interests are, and among all the offerings, all the clubs, all the interest groups on campus, there have to be at least one or two that suit you. Join them, rise to the top leadership role, and start networking there. And that takes off into something probably at the state level, who knows what else. It's the way I would go about it. It's at least something for the resume already. Other questions? I'm just thrilled by the interest.
I'm loud enough, I can talk from back here. I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you. I realize that we have not yet clapped for everyone, but I just want to say a big thank you for everybody and all the things, all the stories that you guys have shared. So, thank you.
Thank you for attending. Thank you, truly, because it is it takes a special effort to come out in the evening. As we've just said, every minute counts and matters. So I know that your time is precious. Your time is precious, and you've come out tonight, especially during this bad weather, and help us celebrate women and men too. Thank you very much, and we hope to do this again next year, maybe with a special